Hi there, and welcome to this introduction to Amazon's Sumerian platform for AR and VR. Amazon Sumerian is a tool for creating augmented reality and virtual reality experiences. Sumerian uses a web-based interface that saves work in the cloud constantly and keeps users from having to install anything on their computers. The editor is a little clunky, but it simplified some of the hardest parts of this kind of creation, making it a great learning platform for people with lots of experience with technology or people who know next to nothing about programming. Let's talk a little bit about some of the things you can expect to learn from this video. Users will create an Amazon Sumerian account and log in to the user interface. They'll learn about entities, including 3D shapes and cameras in the virtual reality scene. They'll learn how to modify materials on the entities they create. And they'll learn how to use state machines to make objects in the VR space do things. Finally, they'll learn how to use HTML objects to combine your VR space with Google Drive, which is a powerful tool for assessment. To create an account, users can go to https://aws.amazon.com/Sumerian. I'm not going to show you how to do this because it does require you to put in credit card information, but the basic tier of the system is free for a year. Pricing afterwards is very reasonable, and it's only needed if a certain threshold of use is met. It's a little easier to just go to Google and search for Amazon Sumerian than to type in the web address. You'll see a lot of results come up that are related to the site, but the top link should take you straight there. In the top right corner of the screen, you'll see an option to create an AWS Amazon Web Services account. You need this to be able to use the tool, so obviously you're going to have to do it. But we'll skip ahead to what comes next. Once you're signed into Sumerian, you'll see a screen that looks kind of like this one. There's a row of templates across the bottom that you can take and modify as needed, and then up top I'll show some of the projects that you've already created. Of course, you won't have any yet. I'm going to show you a little demo that I was working on in preparation for this video. It's pretty simple, and it might be designed to teach elementary school students a little bit about three-dimensional shapes. In the editor, you can rotate the camera around and kind of take a look at the things that you've put into your VR scene. You can make it full screen to see everything a little bit more clearly. You'll see when I click on shapes, it creates widgets so I could move them around if I wanted to. And there's also a button you can press play down at the bottom of the editor that'll let you run the scene as though you were looking at it fresh in a browser. This is what the actual experience looks like for users when they sign in and start playing around. You can see I've got it set up so that when you click on the individual shapes, a little label pops up with their name and color. And that's the scene that we're going to demo how to make as part of this video. By the time we get done watching the video, you'll have something just like this built. Let's talk about importing assets and creating entities in Sumerian, which are really key skills to master. Entities are the building blocks of Sumerian. They're really important. Everything you make will turn out as an entity. Everything you want a user to be able to interact with within the scene needs to be an entity so that they can click on things and manipulate them. There's a growing library of assets that can be imported into the scene, so sometimes you don't even have to make something yourself, which is really useful. And I'm going to show you how to do that right now. If you're following along at home, the first thing you're going to want to do is create a new scene. You can call it whatever you want. I think I call mine something like making my own VR scene. This will be where you kind of play around and follow the steps I give you to make the same scene that I showed you in my little demo. It'll take a second to load things up, and you'll be greeted by a scene that looks kind of like this. You see a grid down in the background. There's 3 lights already in the scene to sort of illuminate stuff. You can right-click with your mouse and drag around to pan the camera. You can select the lights that are there. You could move them around or delete them if you wanted to, but that's not really necessary right now. Now, as you move things around and you kind of explore the scene a little bit, you're rotating the camera, you're panning the camera by clicking and dragging it around, you may notice that things look a little bit boring, and maybe we want to spice stuff up a little bit. So over on the right-hand side, there's a panel that lets you do that. And if you click on that Environment button, you'll see that there's an option inside of it for a skybox. Skybox lets you add a background to your scene, but the default one is kind of boring. It's just this sort of plain blue. It's a horizon. It's not very exciting. We want to make it something that's a little bit more interesting. So we'll import an asset to do that. Amazon has provided lots of different skyboxes that you can choose from, and this is a nice way to learn how to import things. So when you click on the Import Assets button and you scroll through, you can kind of sort through different kinds of assets that you might want to import. But if you scroll down, you'll see a bunch of these sort of panoramic photos that look a little weird. Those are your skybox backgrounds you can choose from. So I'm going to double click on this modern apartment type skybox, and that adds it down to the lower left panel where all my assets are. If you click on the Edit Skybox button, you can drag that skybox file straight over there and drop it in, and boom, it shows up right in your scene, and now you have this cool modern apartment background for your scene to take place in. Of course, you're not limited to that. If you prefer to have something different, there's some nice natural scenes and some things from Seattle around that you can look at. We can take a look at what some of those look like. You see a lot of different pictures of the city and Amazon's headquarters. If you find one that you think is interesting, like these trees, you can import it the exact same way. Double click it, it goes to your asset library. You can drag it to the exact same spot over on the right, and it'll change your background to something else. And that could be nice. Whatever you think is best is fine. Yours doesn't have to come out looking exactly like mine. I do want to mention that skyboxes aren't the only assets there to import, so take a look around and see what's interesting. It's also fairly easy to add three-dimensional entities to your scene, and I'm going to show you how to do that now as well. So even though we added that nice skybox, the first thing that I'm going to do is go into the panel and delete it, just because it's a little easier to work when you don't have a bunch of distracting stuff in the background. I'm moving the camera around, and I'm going to click the Create Entity button up at the top of the screen. Let's start with a box, something very simple. It's a six-sided three-dimensional shape. You can move around in the scene and you'll see it. If you're zoomed out, it might look kind of small, but we can change that later if we want to. With the object selected, you can check out the Details panel on the right-hand side. You'll see the name of the object, which is Box. If you highlight that, you can replace it with something else. I'm going to call it Platform. You can call it whatever you want. Now, boxes aren't the only kind of thing you can add. You can also create entities that have functions like cameras, which are super important. So if we go back into the scene, we're going to add another entity. This time it'll be a camera down at the bottom of the page. I want you to add an orbit camera. These are cameras that can be rotated once your scene has been published, and they're really useful for this kind of activity. You can use the gizmo with the little arrows to move your camera around. You can also modify it in other ways, deselect it, reselect it. You can notice a rotate button where you can grab the little wheels and rotate the camera down. When you do, you'll be able to see the box that you made in the camera's viewport, which is a useful feature. And as you continue to look around, you'll notice, okay, you can select your box, you can rotate that, you can rotate the camera. You can also add lots of other kinds of entities. You're not just limited to cameras and boxes. Take a look, see what's there, play around. I'll wait for you to come back. Importing assets and creating entities isn't the only thing that you're going to do today. We're also going to modify the entities, change them a little bit so that you can use them to better suit whatever needs you have. There's a panel on the right you'll use to modify most of the stuff in your scene, including all of your entities. You can use sliders in the viewport to move things, scale them, and rotate them, but a lot of times it's better to use numbers in that panel on the right-hand side, and I'll show you why. And you can change the size, location, and rotation of the entities that are in the scene. So if you go back to your scene, and you select your box, on the right-hand side, there's that panel I was talking about. We'll come back to that in a second. There are these buttons you can click up at the top. You've already seen them. That'll let you move, transform, whatever you want to call it, rotate, and scale your object. And they work perfectly fine. You get these little arrows you can click on and drag, but sometimes using numbers can be a little more precise. So if you go in and click on some of the numbers, you can reset the location of your cube to 0, 0, 0. It makes it a nice starting location for everything. And you can change the size to be, I don't know, some different amount. If we change it to 5, okay, you can see it changing, but they're still a little bit small. Maybe we want to go a little bit bigger than that. I also want to take a second to point out that the X, Y, and Z values for all this stuff, location, rotation, and scale, corresponds to the same sliders that you see in the scene, in case you're ever wondering which axis something is going to change on.
So I made a 50 by 50, and then I'm looking at it. I think maybe I want to go a little bigger. I'm going to do 75 on the X and 75 on the Z axis so that it's this nice broad platform that I can build all my other stuff on. Camera's still right in the middle, and if you look in the viewport down there, you can see a little bit of the bottom edge of the platform. So I raised the camera some, select the platform again. I'm now thinking maybe I'll rotate it, do 90 degrees, see what that looks like. Obviously, you're not going to keep that because you want it to be a flat platform for the finished product, but that's what it looks like, and using exact numbers can be nice for making right angles and that sort of thing. So in addition to changing those elements of entities, you can also change the color or add textures to them. We're going to do a little bit of that now. If you select the box and you go to the Material tab in that right-hand panel, right at the top you'll see color, and it's really easy. Just drag that around in the selector. You could choose a bunch of different colors. And my reasoning for that is we're going to make a bunch of other shapes. We're going to put them in the corners of this platform and make it so you can change the colors of them and have a little label pop up. And for them to pop out a little bit more, I'm going to have the platform white, and I'm going to give colors to the other objects. So start by making a square. I'm sorry, a cube. You'll see that it comes into the scene right in the middle at 0, 0, 0 coordinates, and it's kind of small. So of course, one of the first things that we're going to do is go to that panel on the right-hand side. We're going to go to box. We're going to rename it cube because this is the cube for our purpose of learning about three-dimensional shapes. And we're going to change the size. We're going to scale it up some. We're going to go 10 by 10 by 10 for this nice even cube. And you see it's a lot bigger. It's a lot easier to see now. Now I could slide it around, but instead of sliding it to where I want it to go, I'm going to use the coordinates that we've got there. And with this 75 by 75 platform, I've found that it's nice to use 35. You see, we change one axis to 35, the x-axis in the case, by 35 on the z, and it takes it nice to in that corner. It's kind of hanging off the side a little bit, which is okay. It's sort of floating there. It looks good where it is. And the nice thing about doing 35 by 35 is that you can use the same coordinates, sometimes changing them to be negative on those same two axes, and you'll be able to put everything right where you need it to go. So same thing with this cone that we've made. We can change the size to be 10 by 10 by 10. This one's a little tricky because it's rotated. It's pointing in the wrong direction. You notice when we've got it set there, it's kind of sticking halfway through. We're going to do the same thing. This time we're going to go negative 35. We're going to change the z to 10. We're going to change the y to 10, the z to 35. But it's pointing it over to the side. So if we rotate it by 90 degrees, well, it's pointing straight down. I actually want to flip it the other way. So I'll go by negative 90 degrees. And now it's pointing up at the sky. The only other thing about it I don't like, it's a little bit higher. It looks a little bit higher than where the cube is. So I'm going to adjust that y value down to about 5. And now you see they look pretty even. It looks pretty good to me. We're going to come back in. We're going to make another shape. We're going to do a cylinder this time. Trying to keep it. It's already called cylinder, so I don't need to change that. I'm trying to keep it in line with the other shapes. So I'll go 10 by 10 by 10 on the size coordinates again. And we're going to move this one to negative 35, 10, and negative 35. It's a third corner we've got dealt with there. Again, I'd rather have it rotated the other way, so I'm going to rotate it by 90 degrees. This one's a cylinder, so it doesn't matter if you go positive or negative. And now we're looking pretty good. Move the camera around, see it lines up. Okay, let's make the last entity. We'll do a sphere for the last one. Sphere, again, even shape, so we can go 10 by 10 by 10. We can change this one to negative 35 on the x. Oh, wait, no, we've done that already. We'll do 35 on the x. We'll do 35, no, negative 35 on the z. And we'll change the y to 10 so that it's floating in the air. And now we have all of our shapes kind of evenly situated on the four corners of our platform. And it's time to move on to the next task, which is going to be to change the colors of some of our three-dimensional shapes. When you have one selected, it's just the same as changing the color of the platform. You go to the panel, you look at the material section, you'll see lots of different options. You can change the color very easily. Look, I made it red, I made it yellow. I'm going to leave it as a nice yellow cylinder. I think that looks fine. We'll rotate around to another shape. Let's say you wanted to add a material to something, give it a little bit more texture than just adding a color. You can import materials from the asset library. I've imported a set of tile materials, and you drag them over into that same panel. Don't worry about following this because we're not actually going to use it. What you'll see is that as you change stuff around, you can give it some more texture. You can change the color of light that it emits and other stuff like that. When I zoom in on it, you can see now it's got this nice cube texture on it. You could play around with that stuff if you really want to, but for our purposes, since again, the goal is really just to learn about three-dimensional shapes or maybe some colors with it, I'm going to take that stuff off and I'm just going to give it a plain color. So instead of anything fancy, I'm just going to turn my square red, no, blue, no, dark blue. Yeah, that looks pretty good to me. We'll move on to the next shape, this time the cone, whatever. I'll change the color. We're going to make this guy a nice shade of pink, okay. And finally the sphere, we change the color one more time. We'll make this one green. Now all of our shapes have fancy colors and they look really good. They really pop on that white background. I'm pretty pleased with that decision. I want to mess around with the camera a little bit now, and with it selected, you can see in that viewport the shapes are shown up. You see the sphere and the sphere and the cylinder there at the edges of the space. In the camera panel, go ahead and change it to the main camera, and what that does is makes it so that when you press the play button to kind of preview your scene, that's the one that you automatically assume control of. And you can click your mouse and drag around, and the camera, because it's an orbit camera, because that's the kind of camera we selected earlier, it'll let you move things around and see all those different shapes. You can change some of the other stuff about it too. You can set it to sort of an even number if you wanted to put it right at 20. Maybe that's a little high, I don't know. It's pretty easy to rotate it to look down on things as you want to. You can slide it. I felt like it was a little off center. It was drifted towards some of those shapes a little bit more than others. Now it feels pretty even, maybe still a little skewed to one side, but it doesn't matter all that much. Those shapes still look pretty good. They really pop on that background. I can twist it all around. You can also adjust the field of view, which sort of changes the way the lens on the camera works, but we don't need to do that. It makes things look a little unnatural, a little fishbowl-y. So when I exit here, you'll see that the next thing I do is go back and change that field of view back to be about what it was. That's kind of an unnecessary change, but useful to know about. It might come in handy in the future. I'm going to scoot it back down a little bit. I felt like it was maybe just a little bit too high up in the air, and now I feel like it's in a pretty good spot, and I'm ready to move on to the next part of this tutorial, which is going to be making things do stuff using state machines. So state machines are the most powerful thing you can do with Amazon Sumerian. It lets you allow objects to have behaviors by using triggering events to transfer between what are called states. Simple states are things like colors and location, so those are little changes you could make, while more complicated state machines can incorporate really powerful features like text-to-speech AIs. And almost any object in Sumerian can have a state machine added to it, which means you can do lots of simple little things that can be kind of fun. So the state machines in our little VR demo here are really simple. We want to have a label appear for our objects when we click on them. We can use state machines to accomplish this goal pretty quickly and pretty easily. We're actually going to use entities to make this happen as well. The entities that we're going to use are 2D HTML objects. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in the viewport in your project right here. So in your scene, you go to Create Entity, and you'll notice that one of the kinds of objects that you can make are 2D HTML objects. When you add one, what you see is some text, and it faces the camera constantly. So no matter where your camera is located, it'll always look the same. And in the world, in the scene, it looks like that as well. You see, you can kind of interact with it too. Highlight the text and whatnot. You can move this wherever you want. You can rotate it however you want. It doesn't really matter. And it'll always look about the same. And so what I'm going to do is create a series of these labels. And each one of them I'm going to put right next to, right above, one of our 4 shapes. And you have to do it this way. It's a little funky, but to make the state machines work, to make this state machine appear when you click on the shape, it has to exist the whole time. So we have to make them first. Then we have to tell them to disappear, which I'll show you how to do in just a little bit. And then we have to tell them how to reappear once the shape is clicked on. But for now, you can see I'm actually duplicating this 2D HTML object. I'm renaming them all with what they're eventually going to say, the shape that they correspond to, changing the name on all of the duplicates, and then I'm changing their coordinates so that they're on top of the shape that they belong with. So the one that's labeled pink cone goes over the pink cone, and our last one here for the yellow cylinder once I change the coordinates, it's going to line up with our yellow cylinder. Got to change the name. And there we go. Now we're ready to move on to the next part, which is actually making these objects do something. So if you've done anything with HTML, you know that it's primarily editing text. And I'm going to show you how to change the text here in case you've never done anything with HTML. It's really straightforward to change these labels to say something else. And of course you could do all sorts of fancy HTML stuff with them, but for our purposes we're just using them as these labels that'll face the camera wherever you go. When you open up the text editor, which you can access down in the HTML section of that panel on the right hand side of the screen, you'll find the text that says this is HTML. Just replace that with whatever you want it to say. You'll see I accidentally hit enter every time, but you actually need to click the save button. And I changed the one over the blue cube to say, well, I said blue square, whoops. It's exactly the same for all of them. You select the object, you click on the HTML box, you choose to open an editor, change the text to say pink cone in that case, save it, and move on to the next shape. So this is pretty straightforward, and you'll see there's a lot of other stuff in that text box. You just don't need to mess with any of it right now, unless, again, you're more familiar with HTML, in which case you can use it to do some more complicated stuff. But for our purposes, just getting started, just getting our feet a little wet, just change the text to reflect whatever it says right over the object where we've put the label. Now that we have all of our labels looking good, it's going to be time to actually make them do something. And again, you can see it in the scene view, and you'll see they all look right. They all look the way that they're supposed to. So let's go ahead and make them do something. So state machines can make the labels appear or disappear when the objects are clicked. I already mentioned that. And it's very straightforward to make that happen. You're going to use two kinds of state machines. There are listen states, which make an entity wait to kind of hear a secret password. It's kind of complicated, but it makes sense once you see what I'm talking about. And then you're going to have emit state machines that cause an entity to say the secret password. So what we're going to do is have the entity say the secret password, then another shape's listening to it, and then that way they can talk to each other. And that's how the label is going to know when it needs to appear. So to show you how state machines work, I'm actually going to go back to an earlier version of this project before we had put the HTML labels in, just to give you an idea of how to implement them into your scene. When you have an object like your cube selected and you click add component, you'll see there's all sorts of neat stuff you can add to it, but we want to obviously add state machine. Right underneath that in that panel, you'll see drop behavior, and you want to click the little plus button to add a behavior to your state machine, which is a component of your entity in the scene. In this case, it's our blue cube. So we need to add actions because we start with a default state, but a state doesn't do anything by itself. It needs actions to tell it what to do. And you'll see that there's all sorts of states that you can choose from. I want you to search for the one that says click or tap on entity. You can search in that top bar, just search for the word click and it'll show right up. You add it, and now state 1 is waiting for you to click on something. Once you click on it, it means it'll do something. Unfortunately, since we only have the one state, it's not doing anything yet, which means we have to add another state. Draw an arrow between them by dragging from one to the other, and now, when you click in state 1, it'll do whatever you say in state 2. Watch this. Oh wait, nothing happened, because I haven't told it what to do in state 2 yet. So the next step is to select state 2 and add an action there. Now, this time, I want you to just change the color. You can see I've selected red. We have our change color action in that second state, and now when we go into the view and we click on the cube, it changes colors from blue to red. But we want to do something a little more complicated than that. So the next step is going to be to go back and delete that action, and we're going to add in something that's a little bit fancier. We're going to make those labels that we made appear and disappear when the objects are clicked on. It's going to be really nice. So the first thing that we have to do to get all this working together is set up our labels so that they're listening for that secret password to make them do something. I find it's sort of easier to start from your end point. And you can see we're back in the scene here that has the labels over each one of the shapes. So select your first label. I'm going to start with the blue cube, and I'm going to add a component to it just like before. I'm going to add a state machine to my label as well, and I'm going to modify its drop behavior. Now, it's usually worth it to label everything correctly. You'll see I actually stopped doing that in this tutorial video because this is a very simple scene, but once you start doing more complicated things, you want to keep on top of that. I'm going to add a state because I want my two states to be able to communicate to each other, and then I'm going to go back to the first state. I'm going to add a hide action to it. What that does is makes it so that it's hiding. You'll see when I click on the play button to test out this scene now, and I spin around to that cube, the label no longer exists. It's hiding. By default, state 1 is the first state. It's where it loads. But I need to get it from where it's hidden to where it's not hidden anymore. So to do that, I'm going to add a listen state action, rather. So what's going to happen now is that it's going to listen in that first state for the secret password. The secret password is going to come in on a channel. I'm going to choose channel 1. When I go from that state to state 2, that transition is going to occur when it hears that secret password being broadcast on channel 1. The opposite of hide is show. Now you can add a show state, a show action to hide. You can see there that they're kind of opposites of each other. When we add show, what happens is it listens for that secret password to be broadcast on channel 1, and that's going to let it transition to show. Of course, it doesn't show up yet, even when you go into the scene, because you haven't figured out how to make it broadcast the secret password yet. That's going to be the next step in this little video. So with that label listening for the secret password, now the next step is going to be to select our cube, because we want the cube to be the thing that triggers the label to show up when we click on it. With the cube selected, we'll add our state machine. Of course, you already have one from where we worked on it a little bit earlier. We're going to add back in that click tap entity action because we want it to happen when it's clicked or tapped on. And of course, we have to add a second state to transition to once we add the click. And we're going to add an emit action. You see, I'm searching for listen. Listen and emit are opposites. We added the listen onto the label. We're going to add emit onto the cube. Emit works the same way as listen. It'll give you the option to input a channel. We did channel 1 before, so we're going to do channel 1 here as well. And now, when you press play, no label, click, and the label shows up. It works exactly the same way for all the labels. You just need to make sure that you choose a different channel for each one. So you're going to see I work through the rest of these labels here. I add all of the state machine components that you need to get them functioning. I'm going to just play some music in and let you watch that happen. You can follow along. It's exactly the same for all of the shapes. So what you can see now that all of the state machines are up and running is that I'm pretty happy with it. Everything works the way it's supposed to, and I want to just change it so that it looks a little bit better at the end. I'm going to go back to my skybox modification in the environment section of the project panel there on the right hand side. I'm going to choose another skybox. Like I mentioned earlier at the start of the video, you could choose any skybox you want. This neutral, like modern apartment setting, looks really good because it's so plain. It's kind of monochrome, so the colors of the shapes really pop out. But it's also not exactly very much fun. So depending on how you want to change this to meet your own needs, you can use any of the things that are available. So we're going to actually expand on the demo from the beginning of this video a little bit by adding Google Drive into the mix. You can use HTML entities to bring the World Wide Web into your Sumerian scenes. They don't just have to be useless labels like earlier. We're going to use a 3D HTML object to create a fixed object in our world that stays put in one place. So those labels rotate with your camera so you always see them, but when we create a 3D HTML object, HTML 3D entity, it actually can be moved around, and it's a fixed tiny little, it starts off as this itty bitty tiny teensy weensy little square down there, you can see, and it's always in the same place. So I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to adjust those scaling parameters a little bit so that it fits better in the scene. You see as you rotate the camera around, the labels kind of rotate to face the cameras, and that shape stays exactly where it is. Notice how the backside has those blue check marks. That means that when you put some sort of HTML onto it, it's only going to show up on the side that's white right now that says this is HTML. It won't show up on that backside, the blue side, so just be aware of that. And you're going to go into your HTML editor, and you'll see the text. This is HTML, just like what we saw on the labels. You can change it to say something else pretty easily, and then that shows up in World as well. What we want to do is something a little bit more complicated than that. We're going to embed a Google form because that's a great way to add some quick assessment to our scene. It's really easy to do. I have a Google form prepared here. And one important note is that in the settings menu, you need to uncheck the box that limits it to only people that share your domain, or else Sumerian can't access it properly, can't access the form properly. In the sharing send form box, you can just highlight that embed HTML. It gives you the code right there. You can see I changed it to 750 by 500 pixels, I think, for its size. You paste it into your HTML text editor, and bam, look at that. It's right there in the world. There's our Google form. It's got what we want. You can scroll on it. I'm just scrolling with the mouse wheel. Really easy. You can check the boxes that show up in it. Except I'm noticing that mine doesn't go all the way down. So I'm going to adjust the size in Sumerian as well to be the same size as those parameters that I selected when I was copying the HTML from Google Forms. Now you can scroll all the way down. Now I can select whatever shapes I want. I can look around, I can click on things to remind myself that the cone is pink and the cylinder is yellow. And in that way I can have this little assessment added into my Sumerian scene. And I've submitted it, and there you go. This is an easy way to embed a Google form. Hopefully you see how that could be a powerful tool for some quick assessment while you're using Sumerian. So the last step in Sumerian is publishing your scene, and this is something that's really easy to do as well. It's literally just clicking a button, but you have to publish the scene before you can have students use the scene, and I'm going to show you how to do that now. From your plain, straightforward, you can look around and see it's the same scene we've been working on the whole time. You can go up to the top right corner, and there's a publish button. And it's that easy. You click the publish button. It says it's not published. Okay, let's publish it. It'll think for a minute. And then it gives you a link. You can copy that link. And then you can paste that link anywhere you want. I'm going to paste it into a new tab to just show you that this is what it looks like when you open up your VR scene in a new window. Here it is. We're here. We're live. Of course, you don't see the grid because we're not in the editor mode anymore. You don't have the option to go out and change things. It's just the scene. But here it is. We can click on our shapes. We can fill out our form if we want to. Try to right click on it. We can submit it. Actually, we can because I made it so that all the questions are required when I was making the form. But you see how simple it is. You publish the Sumerian scene, you copy the link, and then you can put it anywhere you want. You can email it straight to people. You can post it on your learning management system to have students access it easily, and that saves you the trouble of having to do it over and over again. And you can also add it as a bookmark on, say, an iPad or whatever other device you might have available in your classroom, whatever you use. It is that easy to publish your scene. So I want to go back over the learning objectives that we set out at the beginning of this video very quickly to wrap things up here. We created Amazon Sumerian accounts. We logged into the interface, learned a little bit about entities, including 3D shapes and cameras and how they function. We learned how to modify the materials on those entities, change their colors, add textures if we felt like it. We also learned how to use state machines to make objects in the VR space, our scene, actually do things. And finally, at the end, we learned how to use HTML objects to combine our VR spaces with Google Drive to add some assessment to our casual little experiences for people learning about three-dimensional shapes and colors. I hope that was beneficial for you, and I want to say thanks a lot for taking the time to watch. Have a great day.